On today's episode of the Cryptoverse, Richard Branson shares with us why he thinks blockchain is an economic revolution. TunnelBear is the simple VPN app that makes it easy to browse the web privately and enjoy a more open and secure internet experience. Try TunnelBear for free by checking out the link in the video description below. Hi there guys, and welcome to the latest episode of the Cryptoverse, your regular dose of news and commentary on Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies and blockchains. I am your host, Chris Coney. So let's get into today's news. Today we return once again to Bitcoin.com. Jamie Redman has written this article about Richard Branson and why he thinks blockchain is an economic revolution. So let's see what this has got to say for itself. So it starts out by saying Virgin Group founder and billionaire entrepreneur Sir Richard Branson is a huge supporter of blockchain technology. While talking to the press on the 3rd of October, Branson said the tech could bring an economic revolution to many nations worldwide. So the first bit I've highlighted here is that it says Richard Branson has a keen interest in blockchain technology, and to make his point, Branson referred to the recent partnership between Bitfury and Hernando de Soto, who are trialing a land titling distributed ledger platform. Now, this is the idea of putting land titles on the blockchain. And this was actually one of the first use cases that was discussed when Bitcoin first launched. I've actually invested myself in a project called Bitland, which is starting off in Ghana in Africa. So they're starting off in Ghana and then they're expanding to the rest of Africa. And the reason why I think this idea of land titling was one of the first ever use cases that was discussed after Bitcoin was launched is because when people say, what is Bitcoin? It's basically a digital database that tracks the ownership of a particular asset. On the Bitcoin blockchain, it tracks ownership of Bitcoins, whereas you could use another blockchain to track the ownership of any other asset that is represented by whatever crypto token lives on that blockchain. So that leads us on to this next bit I've highlighted, which says, at the Virgin Disruptors event this week in London, Branson told the attendees this, quote, if you take somewhere like Egypt, 90% of the people have got houses, they've got a garden, but they've got no piece of paper to show ownership of that. And without ownership of your property, it's almost impossible to start a business or get a bank loan or anything. Close quote. Now, I spoke yesterday about crowdfunding and ICOs and how a blockchain project has to solve a real-world problem to have any chance of success. So the project that Richard Branson is talking about here, it actually solves the exact same problem that Bitland is hoping to solve, which is this idea of putting land titles on a blockchain to say that, if you own the private key for that particular cryptographic token, that token is then linked to a property in the real world. That's good enough as ownership, right? So if you can't prove ownership of a particular piece of land, well then it's at risk of being confiscated because some authoritarian government could just say, well, it's in dispute, so we'll take it as public property, right? But on top of that even, you won't invest in building anything on that land, like a house or a commercial property or whatever, in case that land ownership gets contested by someone else and then it gets taken away from you, right? So it's not like you can take the building with you. If someone contests the land ownership and the land ownership gets assigned to someone else, it's not as if you can just pick up the house that you built on that land and then move it. So because of that, you have to leave it there and you lose all of the money that you invested in building that piece of property. Now this next bit shows how serious Richard Branson is about blockchain technology. He's making real moves to support the development of this industry by hosting his own events. And this highlighted bit here in green says, over the past 2 years, the Virgin founder has held an annual blockchain summit on his private Necker Island. So you probably know that already, that Richard Branson, throughout his career, every time he made a major profit of some kind, whether it's record label or whatever, he would build an extra bit onto his island that he bought. So first of all, he bought the island, but there was nothing on it. And then every time he had a major success with a band from Virgin Records or with the airline or whatever, he would then give himself some kind of reward. He would put a physical manifestation to represent that success by building another piece on Necker Island. And I believe Necker Island is in the Caribbean. I'm pretty confident that is where it is. Now this next bit appeals to me. It kind of gives me some respect for Richard Branson as a man and as a mind. So let me read this to you. The highlighted bit in red says, when a Bloomberg reporter asked if he feels Bitcoin is a currency that will work, this is what Richard Branson said in response. Quote, well, I think it is working. There may be other currencies like it that may be even better. But in the meantime, there's a big industry around Bitcoin. People have made fortunes off Bitcoin. Some have lost money. It is volatile. But people make money off volatility too. Close quote. So the bit that really got me was the first bit. So if you could read that casually and miss the whole thing. But this to me shows this is a man who can think or has the ability to think for himself. Because here, when the Bloomberg journalist asked him a leading question, they were not able to lead him. So it says, when a Bloomberg reporter asked if he feels, key bit, Bitcoin is a currency that will work, Branson responds by going, well, I think it is working. So the leading question was, do you think Bitcoin will work? And the assumption in the mind of the reporter is that Bitcoin isn't yet working. So they were looking, that's the leading question. The assumption is that Bitcoin isn't already working. And they were looking for a yes or no. And if Branson had answered yes or no, unconsciously, we as the public, people witnessing that, unconsciously, even if we wouldn't register it consciously, that would communicate to us that Richard Branson also agrees that Bitcoin isn't yet working, right? So he wasn't complicit in giving a yes or no answer. Because it says, do you think Bitcoin is a currency that will work some point in the future, right? And he's like, well, I think it's working now, isn't it? So to me, that shows his level of self-awareness, his level of intelligence, because he immediately saw that the question itself was looking at Bitcoin through a particular lens. And it was the lens that the reporter was using, and they were trying to get Richard Branson to look through the same lens. Whereas he even saw the lens and was like, well, you're looking at it in a particular way. And without taking on that lens, he decided to look at it through his own lens, right? And was like, oh, I think it is working. Now, I don't want to belabor the point there, but it's these kind of subtleties that I personally look for in people like this. Because that self-awareness, that is like the humdinger when it comes to becoming successful in anything. So Richard Branson's ability to think for himself, I just respect that highly. And he may have even done the reporter a favour, because the reporter may not have even been aware of their own lens, right? They might not know, well, it's a Bloomberg reporter, so you would think that they would be pretty well versed in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency stuff, but that's not a given. They may have just been sent out to do the interview or whatever and not really know much about it. And they may have been given the question, ask Richard Branson if he thinks Bitcoin will work. And when he comes back with the answer, the reporter might suddenly go, oh, and they might then start looking into it for themselves and form their own opinion, right? Anyway, enough of that. Let's move on. So this last paragraph of the article, it says, there's no doubt ideas like blockchain technology and Bitcoin are on executives and developers' minds. With backing from influential business people like Branson and his colleagues, these protocols come much closer to starting the revolution they promise. Well, again, that's another leading thing. Starting the revolution, well, it's already going, isn't it, right? The very moment Bitcoin was invented, that was when it began. Because a revolution is a scale. It's not like, when does the revolution actually happen? Does it happen at a particular point when 1 minute before there's no revolution and then immediately 1 minute later there's a revolution? Or does it begin like as a seed? The moment that Bitcoin solves the Byzantine generals problem, is that when the revolution begins? Because then it's just a tiny revolution and then gradually it gathers pace. That's the way I see it. I see it much more as a gradual thing. People might think that as soon as it gets mass adoption, but when the hell is that? When the hell is mass adoption? Is it when 5 million people are involved in Bitcoin? Is it when every single payment in the world is done with some kind of cryptocurrency? Well, no, of course not. And you can't really point to the specific point where the revolution happened. Yeah, you can say when it started. I could say when it started, it was when the Byzantine generals problem was cracked and the idea of a distributed ledger that was unforgeable, i.e. Bitcoin, was created. That's when it was started. And then every day, week, month after that, more people just joined the revolution. So let me finish off today by just telling you why I think Richard Branson has been so successful in his life. I believe it's because he knows who he is and he's been himself for most of his life. Like, he's a hippie, right? He's a hippie from the 60s. He always loved his long hair. He even called his company Virgin, right? Which was controversial back then. He published bands like the Sex Pistols. He started an airline from scratch by buying a second-hand aeroplane. They even hosted an event yesterday, which is mentioned in this article, called Virgin Disruptors. So this guy is a rebel by nature. And if he didn't embrace that, I do not believe he would have been anywhere near as successful as he has been. So he's a rebel, always has been, always will be. That's probably why the word revolution appears so frequently in this article that mentions him, right? And his support of blockchain technology is perfectly in line with his rebel nature. So grassroots efforts are great. But if there's a few heavy hitters working on a problem from above, then things can just move much, much more quickly. And that's why I've got respect for the guy, and I hope you do too. All right, so that's going to do it for today's edition of the Cryptoverse with me, Chris Coney. Thanks very much for listening and watching today. If you liked the video, like it. If you disliked it, please leave me a comment and some feedback. Get subscribed, and even consider supporting us by going to the Cryptoversity website, go to the podcast page, and either send us a Bitcoin tip to the address on that page, or click through to the Steemit network and upvote this episode to give us some Steam rewards, or visit the Cryptoversity merchandise store, where you can buy yourself a t-shirt or an iPhone case with the Cryptoversity branding on it. That kind of thing helps us out a lot. Or if you'd like more structured information on Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and blockchains, head over to the courses section and buy yourself an online course. That's all for today, guys. So until tomorrow and the next episode of the Cryptoverse, it's me, Chris Coney, saying bye for now.